recapping an amazing Super Bowl 57. That is what we're doing today on RotoViz Overtime. Shawn, we talked recently about how we really just wanted this game to live up to, the kind of post-match kind of expectations, I guess we'll say. Obviously, you're a Kansas City Chiefs supporter, so you were also hoping for it to live up to the expectations, but also the Kansas City Chiefs to win the Super Bowl. And that is what happened, as they run out victors 38-35, and what I think is, it's right up there anyway, if it's not the best Super Bowl in recent memory, in terms of both teams playing to pretty much their fullest potential throughout the majority of this contest. Good coaching, all things around, and I thought this was just absolutely fantastic. Shawn, some of our recent shows, the title last week, we had Get Ready for the Greatest Super Bowl of All Time. I'm going to ask you in a second if we met that marker. Show before that, Shawn, previewing the previous round of playoff games, was the legend of Patrick Mahomes. We're going to talk about that on today's show because that legend has continued to evolve. And then we had Travis Kelce is an all-time great, was the week before that. So Travis Kelce continuing his march in those postseason touchdown rankings, as he is into second place, I believe, all-time now. But just phenomenal stuff from the Kansas City Chiefs side of things. Andy Reid getting another Super Bowl. Somebody who for so much of his career, I think, was underappreciated for what he had done with the Philadelphia Eagles, ironically, but now has 2 Super Bowl victories with the Kansas City Chiefs, putting himself into that upper echelon of coaches in NFL history. But Shawn, the listeners want to know how you're feeling, how you enjoyed this one. 10-point deficit at halftime. The Eagles kicking this one off in terms of the Chiefs deferring, giving the Eagles the ball. The Eagles march down, score a touchdown. Chiefs answer that straight away. But in that second quarter, it was 17 points to 7 in favor of the Eagles, heading in at halftime, but getting the ball back. But Shawn, the question I have for you is, getting the ball back, but as that second half finishes up, Patrick Mahomes is looking very uncomfortable after a twist of that ankle, and we all know how that was affected heading into the Super Bowl. How were you feeling throughout this game? But I think the first point I think that it may have felt like it was really slipping away was as we entered halftime 10 down, with serious question marks at that point about how Patrick Mahomes would continue in this match.
Yeah,
sorry, congratulations to your Kansas City Chiefs.
You said so many things there that, could be a whole show in and of themselves.
It really could, yeah.
It was tough there at halftime. And when you look at that, and you look at some of the win probability stuff where the Eagles go to in the 75% range at multiple points, sort of late in the second, early in the third quarters. But in many ways, it felt even more than that, right? Because you have an all-time great Philadelphia Eagles team that is doing everything that they need to do. They're moving the ball at will. They're executing in this elite passing game. They're actually getting those stops that they needed to get on the Chiefs. And one of the things about the Mahomes injury is they do go down and score right away to start the game, to tie it at 7. But after that, the Eagles had made some stops and they had gotten Mahomes a little bit uncomfortable. We know that the Eagles had multiple elements to their defense, and especially their pass defense, that makes them such a difficult matchup. The Chiefs have been forced to punt on short drives a couple of times, and that's before the injury. And the thing about it was that Mahomes looked good. I mean, he looked very different than the AFC Championship game. And that was one of the things that Ben and I talked about on Stealing Bananas, is that if he looks good, then the Chiefs are the favorites. Now, they're very small favorites because this Eagles team is fantastic. But if he looks more or less normal, then you probably, instead of a 1.5 points to the Eagles, you're probably 1.5 points to the Chiefs. And he looked that way, and the Chiefs are still getting dominated, right? And they're getting dominated. The time of possession, the total plays run, the fact that the Chiefs would be completely blown out if not for the defensive touchdown. They're counting on this dynamic where you can score last in the first half, get the ball back in the second half, score again, and really use that to your advantage to separate yourself. Instead, they're stopped, and the Eagles tack on another field goal. So they're up to 24-14 at halftime. You have an injured player, and you're going to be looking at a fairly limited number of possessions because of the way the Eagles play. when you have Patrick Mahomes and you have Andy Reid, obviously you have a Chiefs team overall that has demonstrated time and time again that they're going to compete. The game isn't over, but I mean, it's as close to over as you're going to ever get at halftime of a Kansas City Chiefs game. So from that point, and the thing about it is, I mean, I've read terms used like the Eagles collapse and different things to that effect. And you almost have to term it that way, a little bit like, as you know, I can't this Jayhawks fan, you know, you think back to the NCAA championship game last season, and they come from the largest halftime deficit to win, and you get the North Carolina collapse types of stories. But even more in this game than in that. In both cases, it just really was a matter of one elite team counterpunching and hitting really hard at a key moment and bringing the game back together. The Eagles didn't do anything wrong in this game other than perhaps punting on their own end of the field. I mean, if the only thing that you did wrong was maybe not go for it in a crazy situation, then, I mean, sometimes the opposing team is just going to beat you. And so, yeah, I mean, we took a little bit of a breather. I mean, normally probably wouldn't watch the halftime show, but with the Chiefs getting not exactly blown out, but again, deep trouble, you know, watch a little bit of Rihanna. You go back in, and then the Chiefs look, I wouldn't say completely different, because again, I mean, they went out and scored to start the game. You know, one of the storylines in this game was that Andy Reid had more plays in than ever before. We saw the value of that as you go through that first drive, as you go through the second half. This really was one of the all-time great games. It's never really the case, because you go back and just matchups are a little bit different. The way the ball bounds on a key play is a little bit different. But when you talk about Kansas City winning the Super Bowl, this Eagles team that they defeated, far better than the Buccaneers team they lost to a couple years ago, far better than the San Francisco 49ers team that they also had to come from double digits down in the second half to defeat. It also feels like both of these teams were far better than the Rams and the Bengals in last year's Super Bowl. And that's not even really a criticism at all of those teams, who were fantastic in their own right, played a good Super Bowl. You have unique things that both of those teams do well. And yet again, I don't think there's any way to look at this as one of the best Super Bowls ever played between two of the greatest teams of all time.
Yeah, I think absolutely. The one thing I took away from this game and watching it live and watching it since is the execution from both teams was just exceptional, in terms of to be in such a high pressure environment against such exceptional, you know, competition in your opposition, and to be able to do exactly what you have to do under those scenarios is obviously very, very tough to do. And both teams throughout this game managed to do that. Like in this again, even we're going to go kind of through the game, Shawn, and go through the key points, but you mentioned the Eagles and how they were doing, but like Jalen Hurts is in a situation where when they do go behind then to the Chiefs in the fourth quarter, they're 8 points behind. They need to go get that touchdown, get a 2-point conversion. He marches them down the field, ties it at 35-35. There's 5 minutes left at that point. He never gets the ball back. Just even from that point of view, they execute to the highest level to get the 8 points off the touchdown and 2-point conversion. But then the level of execution from the Chiefs side then for what they did, and I'm wondering, I think we should go through the game just in the key points tried it, but the one part that I want to put up out of the play of the entire game, I think, was Jerick McKinnon and his heads up play there to stay in bounds and also to not go in for the touchdown, because that is the difference in the Eagles having that chance to get back down the field with plenty of time left on the clock versus what actually did happen. So both on that one, I thought the Eagles should let him in, and also for him to then to not go in. I thought that was just exceptional again, and that high moment when you have a chance to get in the Super Bowl for that touchdown. I had quite a few wagers on yesterday that involved a Jerick McKinnon anytime touchdown. So, but I just think the heads up play that involved was exceptional. But Shawn, going through it a little bit in the order of the game, the play calling, everything that went down, and there's so many things like you mentioned. There's so many talking points coming out of this of where you could go. But when we look at the game, you mentioned the defensive touchdown for the Chiefs. There was 2 things in that first half that really stood out. And at the time, I really thought that the Chiefs shouldn't have went for the field goal prior to them missing the field goal where they hit the upright. What was your thoughts on the Chiefs at that point where they go for the field goal? It is missed by Butker, and then after that, then it's a situation where they get a touchdown pretty much in quick, 2.5 minutes from the Eagles at that point. Did you think that's a situation there where you really have to go for it against an Eagles team who are going to consistently go for it on 4 downs? That was at the point a 4th and 3 from the Eagles 24.
You never know what score is going to be the one that helps allow you to win, but it does seem a lot more unlikely that it's going to be this field goal here. I'll explain a little bit more why at the very end as well, but the issue here when the Kansas City Chiefs, and you know that the Eagles are going to dominate clock in all likelihood, and you know that the Philadelphia Eagles, the thing that they bring to the table is being almost unstoppable in short yardage. You do want to get that early lead. You're thinking we're going to get the ball to start the second half. This can all be part of us getting the small edges to win the game here. And hopefully at that point, they're thinking that Harrison Butker is more or less over some of the injuries and some of the struggles that they have had throughout the course of the season, and he's going to knock that down. But as soon as he makes contact, you're thinking, well, that's, you have the instant hindsight of they should have obviously gone for it, because even before you can tell for sure that it's going to go off and hit the upright and miss, you're thinking, if he doesn't completely nail that, anyway. It's the wrong choice. It's interesting because right before that, the Chiefs had more or less their only bad play of the game in the drives where they looked comfortable and confident. Now, obviously, they have those 2 punts that immediately follow. They went through this stretch here where the Eagles defense did an excellent job of limiting Mahomes, taking away the different options. It almost appeared like perhaps the Chiefs were saving some of the plays that they had dialed up for this game for maybe higher leverage moments, or perhaps just didn't work there. But that 3rd and short play was more or less bottled up, and the way it was supposed to release, the receivers coming out there, none of that ever materialized. Mahomes is trying to decide between scrambling and dumping it off to another receiver who's not going to make the first down. Fortson, even if he catches that, is going to get tackled. So the fact that you have just failed on the previous play perhaps pushes you a little bit in that direction. But on both sides of this, when teams were stopped for field goals, and the Chiefs defense, they didn't get a lot of stops in this game, but they got the key stops. They got the return touchdown. That's all you can expect to get. And when you're able to get those, they make a huge difference. The Chiefs here, you kind of like to see them go for it, because you don't want to be at the end of the game thinking that we lost more or less because we didn't have enough guts. And there are so many ways this game could have played out to where you look back and you think that was the place where the Chiefs lost it. I think if you have Patrick Mahomes and you have Andy Reid as a play caller, you have to go.
Yeah, I thought they had to go in the moment, and based on what we've seen throughout the season with some of Butker's struggles and with the injuries and with the short yardage with the 3 yards, and again, with it being at the Eagles 24, it's not a case that you're turning it over in your own half or at the halfway line. And then the other part of it is, it did feel like in this game, the way it started off, touchdown, it was going to be a situation where you needed to maximize every opportunity to get in the end zone. And that was kind of what played out throughout the rest of the game. But at that point in time, I was surprised the Chiefs didn't go for it. Then it is a situation we get the touchdown for the Eagles, leads to another punt by the Chiefs. And then we get the fumble touchdown play, which was obviously massive in the context of this game. And I do want to obviously go through some of the statistics for each individual player, but for Jalen Hurts in this, I thought he was exceptional. That's the only kind of blemish for him in the game, which turned out to be just obviously gigantic in the context of things. But he has 304 passing yards, 1 touchdown. He also has 15 carries for 70 yards and 3 touchdowns. Just, again, one of the probably all-time losing quarterback performances in a Super Bowl from what he was able to do. But he responds to that. And I know, Shawn, we talked on some of the previous shows about maybe lacking poise in some of the situations in the previous playoff games where he may have looked a little bit rusty. But I thought in this, again, after that, goes straight down the field, leads the team to a touchdown. I thought he just showed incredible leadership multiple different times in this when there was adversity potentially starting to creep in. But then you mentioned after that touchdown, it's another punt by the Chiefs, and then it's a field goal just as time is kind of ticking down here in the first half of the game, that second quarter, and it's a 10-point lead then for the Eagles at halftime. So we talked through right there before that punt for the Chiefs. That's when we get the injury again to Patrick Mahomes. Lots of concern there. They come out, they start the third quarter with the touchdown, 10 plays, 75 yards, and the touchdown puts them within 3 points. Eagles then have to settle for a field goal. Then we get another touchdown, which puts the Chiefs up by 1 point. There was one other consideration when we get to the touchdown that puts them into the lead and gives them that 8-point advantage. They go for the point after there, and that gives them obviously the 7 points for that. Was there a thought in your mind there that they could have potentially went for the 2-point conversion there to try and make it a 2-score game?
Yeah, I was telling everybody I was watching with, you've got to go for 2 here. You've got to go for 2
I
here.
was thinking, when I was seeing it, I was thinking, Shawn is watching this, and he is definitely telling everyone this there that this is an analytical play here. Let's get the 2 points.
It just does so many things for you. It creates a 2-possession game. You don't risk the fact that Butker could very easily just miss the regular conversion. And you know that once you go up 8, that the Eagles are going to go down and score and tie. Now, you say you know. One of the things that happened in this game, you mentioned the fumble and the defensive touchdown. Jalen Hurts ran effectively in this game, but other than his specific runs and other than the short yardage runs, which
Chiefs done a great job there, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what the NFL does with some of the rules. I don't necessarily think that they want offensive players pushing on the back of other offensive players. Aesthetically, it's not great. It's also not great from a safety perspective. You've got these plays that don't end, and defenders and offensive players launching themselves into the scrum. Dangerous plays as well. We'll see kind of the way that goes. With the way that the rules are now, this is just masterful from the Eagles. The Chiefs had no way to stop these plays. But other than those plays, the Chiefs' defense came through, right? And they put so much pressure on Hurts. He sacked a couple of times. They forced that fumble. And they also completely bottle up the Philadelphia Eagles' elite running game, which did cause some problems for the Eagles from a play calling perspective. Now, when I say cause problems, they're very small problems. But in a game where the win and the loss is on such a razor's edge, those small problems were what allowed Kansas City to win. And you look at that 2-point conversion, and the Chiefs are there. They had that play completely walled off, and then they don't make it. And Jalen Hurts fights his way in. Again, just another great play that Hurts made. I think an excellent play call from the Kansas City Chiefs defensive coordinator. These teams were so well prepared for this game. You mentioned the execution. Even on a play like this where the Chiefs execute perfectly, then you get just an outstanding physical play to defeat what the Chiefs have done from an execution standpoint. Again, you just look play after play after play, and both teams just at the very highest level. This was such a cool game. But you know that Jalen Hurts is going to go score. He's going to tie the game up. And then the fact that you didn't go for 2, there's always that possibility as well that if you end up going for 2 yourself and miss, and so you're up 7, and then the Eagles score, that they go for 2 and go ahead of you. I think that's unlikely, though. It's just a much better dynamic in terms of the various scenarios that could play out as the game then continues if the Chiefs themselves go for 2 and try and go up 9.
Yeah, the only downside potential there for the team going for 2 is the one that you mentioned there, is if the Eagles do score and then go for 2, the likelihood of them then moving up the field and scoring and it being a situation that you're not getting the ball back. And we've talked about this a few times throughout the season, where when the team knows what they have to do, so in that situation, the Eagles have to go up and score, they have to go for 2. There's no question about it. They have to do it there. We see sometimes if a team is 3 behind, they're kind of going down the field and they're thinking, we're going to settle for a field goal here if we don't get the touchdown. And they don't push it as much as if they're 4 points behind or 5 points behind, where they're trying to get into the end zone. And I think that would have been another kind of example of that. As gutsy as things you can do in a Super Bowl, I think a 2-point conversion to try and win there may be a little bit more when you only need to go for the point to level things from the other perspective of trying to tie it rather than to give yourself that advantage from what the Chiefs could have done there. the game, obviously, Shawn, continues out. This really felt routed, like the last team with the ball was going to win. And not, obviously that didn't happen. The Eagles did have the ball last, but they had 8 seconds left to try and get into the end zone. So I think that, just again, back to the execution, we're into the situation now where we have Patrick Mahomes has the injury, comes out after halftime, whatever the medical staff had to do to get him out there, has a number of big plays in this, including the long rush to get them in to scoring position. But we also have plays, Shawn, at this point made by a number of kind of several pieces throughout the season. Players we have talked a lot about on the show, Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, both stepping up and getting into the end zone. Obviously, didn't have a huge amount of plays that they were involved in, but involved in the keyest of key plays. Both of those, again, exceptional play calling from the Kansas City Chiefs. Wide open, easy walk-in touchdowns. Exactly what you're trying to scheme in those situations. But the other play, Shawn, that was huge is the 65-yard punt return by Kadarius Toney. It is the longest punt return in Super Bowl history. Just, again, all 3 phases of the game, the execution to be able to get to that position, again, just superb. So 2 players that we've talked about, Shawn, Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney, stepping up in the biggest moment for the Chiefs. You had talked with Ben previously about Toney possibly being a key piece to this game. Probably not in the exact way that we were thinking heading in with the way he returned this punt, but a major play. What was your thoughts on those 2 players? And I guess how the ball was spread around throughout the Chiefs as a whole. This, to me, for Patrick Mahomes throughout the game, and I did mention this to the people I was watching with a number of times, this felt very Tom Brady, Patriots, a lot of being able to call the right plays, get in and out of the right plays, take what the opposition was giving you, and then being able to execute again in those key moments and get those touchdowns when you have those opportunities. I don't know, for you, did it feel something like that? It felt very much like what he learned maybe in the loss to the Buccaneers. Like you mentioned, that this team here and the Eagles is a better team than that Buccaneers team. I think with the ankle injury, with how he had to play, again, it's seeing the growth of Mahomes as a quarterback and his game overall. So he has all that raw natural ability, but now he is pairing that up with the veteran savvy of how to manage the game as well here.
And the other element is just that once you don't have a Tyreek Hill, it frees you up to more or less do whatever you want. And you had this at least mild disconnect between Hill, who wanted to be used the way he was used this year with the Dolphins, and the Chiefs, who want to be able to exploit all the matchups. The thing here is so cool is that this is a full team win for the Chiefs, and it's a full team run to the Super Bowl where you have MVS with the big game against the Bengals in the AFC Championship, and then he has only 1 target in this game and appears to do a pretty poor job in terms of his route on that target. We flip entirely back to this being a Juju Smith-Schuster game where, for one of the first times in a recent stretch, Juju is the guy. He leads the team with 9 targets. That's far and away the most. One of the things that appeared to happen in this game is that the Eagles go into halftime, and despite having been so successful in the first half, you almost get the sense that they said, let's make sure we don't let Travis Kelce beat us in the second half. That almost might have been the thing that opened the rest of these plays up, because you have Juju with the very solid underneath roll, which is what they wanted from him for this season. If you told him that they were going to get 9 targets, 7 receptions, 53 yards in the Super Bowl, then they're like, yeah, that's exactly what we're hoping for from this signing. Obviously, Kelce has the nice game that keeps him in it early, but then the target distribution among the rest of these guys is just so minimal, right? You got the 3 targets to Jerick McKinnon, you got the 2 targets to Justin Watson, and then 1 to Noah Gray, 1 to Kadarius Toney, 1 to Sky Moore, the aforementioned 1 to MVS, and then 1 to Fortson. These guys were just involved on those specific plays that helped them win this game. You probably don't look at it when the season starts and say that if you get 1 catch from Toney, 1 catch from Moore, and again, Toney not on the roster even at that point, but you're talking about the guys who really are the playmakers as you go down the stretch. If they're that uninvolved, can the Chiefs win? But it was just such a balanced attack. And you mentioned Patrick Mahomes, I mean, this is a game here where he throws for the 3 touchdowns. He cements all the different things with his legacy, but there were not a lot of examples of the crazy arm talent that we tend to see from him in this game. Instead, it's just the perfect job of executing the plays that they needed to execute to beat this specific defense in the most important game of the season. And now we have a really interesting offseason where Juju, MVS, do they keep these guys? Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, you're thinking, I mean, they made the biggest plays to help a team win the Super Bowl, but they weren't involved in the game plan at all, basically. Like, are they going to take the next step? Do they have confidence that either of those players can be more than a gadget guy? I mean, there's a long time until we have to answer all those questions, but from a fantasy football perspective, those are very interesting. We have FFPC drafts going on. We have Underdog drafts going on. You want to have exposure to this team, but they are presenting you with a pretty tricky calculation, an interesting puzzle to solve, in that the targets here beyond Travis Kelce going to be very hard to predict for the 2023 Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, and circling back again, that's what, even before this game and throughout the season, those times where I was thinking through the Patriots analogy of, like, you know, you have Brady, you have Gronk, and you have Bill Belichick, and in this situation you have Kelce, you have Mahomes, and you have Andy Reid. But we have seen, and same with the running back position in Casey, you know, with New England for all those years, there was just the rotation of players coming in, and, you know, it was all about execution, and that's why I felt it a few times here. A play, Shawn, that I thought could have really changed how this game ended up was an incomplete pass for the Philadelphia Eagles, and it came kind of in the middle of the second quarter. It's a situation where it's a deep pass to Quez Watkins, who I think really should make a play, which would have ended up with, you know, the Eagles inside the red zone, and really good situation. They settled for a punt on that. That was after the second half opening touchdown for the Kansas City Chiefs. They settled for that field goal, and from that point forward, that's when the Chiefs really start to take advantage. Did you see that as a key play at the time? Were you also surprised at the failed execution of it? We've used execution a lot in this podcast, but that's another one.
That's one that, when you look back at the missed opportunities, there were so few in this game, but that one does stand out. And unfortunately, Quez is going to have to, I say, live with that one. You're going to have those flashbacks at different moments going forward and wish that you had made that play. It was a perfectly schemed play. It was a perfectly thrown ball. It is a difficult catch anytime that you have your arms fully extended on a deep pass. You can obviously not make that play. It's not like that is going to be automatic.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's going to think he should have made it, and that would help them. Now, the thing that happens there is immediately after that, they get the miracle play from Dallas Goedert. I definitely wanted that play to be incomplete, and so I spent a lot of time, like, slow-mo, frame by frame, forwarding through and moving back to try and
that wasn't there's a lot of talk at times of Jalen Hurts and his throwing ability. That was an exceptional throw by Hurts in a high pressure, high leverage situation to complete that. And it reminded me quite, I'm doing a lot of looking back at other games, but Julio Jones in the game that they obviously lose to the Patriots in that Super Bowl reminded me a lot of that, where it's like just over the reach of the defensive back and just gets in bounds. But it was inbounds. Shawn, you're happy that it was inbounds at the end of your frame by frame analysis?
Yeah, it's so difficult to actually tell where he has control. I don't think there's any way to do it from at least the footage that we were shown. And if it's a rule to catch, it's a catch. You can't overturn it if you can't tell where he has the ball. If you give him control at the point that they obviously did, then his foot is still touching the ground. It is a catch. I thought they did a fantastic job with the officiating in this game. They had a couple of plays that were obviously controversial because they're going to be controversial regardless of how they turn out. But I mean, they make the correct call on that one. It was a little bit odd because the Devontae Smith big play down the sideline was very clearly not a catch, and that did get overturned. But the booth and Mike Pereira didn't seem like they even bothered to watch that replay and notice the fact that it was very obviously not a catch. The potential for the Chiefs to have a second defensive touchdown was an incredibly close play that I also did plenty of forwarding and backwarding on because I wanted to be sure. And again, that's the correct call. They did a great job with it. I mean, he was a fraction from getting the third foot down. That's one where, in terms of what's actually a catch, in terms of catching the ball and being ready for the defensive contact, I mean, that's a catch. But the way that the rules work, it's very clearly not a catch, and the rules are in place to make it clear, to remove the judgment call. And so, again, everything went exactly how it is supposed to in that situation. The officials were all over this game. They did a very nice job.
Yeah, we'll save. I'm sure there's people listening, and we haven't mentioned a certain aspect of the officiating thus far. We'll save that for another couple of minutes down the line. I do want to mention, Shawn, some of the performances we did talk in the previous shows, and I know we're focusing quite heavily on the winning, victorious Kansas City Chiefs side here, but from the other perspective, we have Devontae Smith at 100 yards on 7 receptions, 9 targets for him in this. But AJ Brown was the player that we talked about, hoping that he would have an impact. He did have an impact, but unfortunately for him, was on the losing side. And obviously, if we're looking at this from a historical perspective, we're going to be looking at what Travis Kelce did, what Patrick Mahomes did. I mentioned that Jalen Hurts on the losing end off this. I'm sure it's going to, be very tough for him at the moment. But when he looks back, he should be incredibly proud of the performance he put in. But Devontae Smith and AJ Brown, massive parts of that performance. The deep touchdown, 45-yard touchdown to AJ Brown. Really nice play. Maybe not Hurts' best throw, but a really nice adjustment and catch for AJ Brown there, and his biggest performance of the last number of weeks. Devontae Smith as well, Shawn, he had his longest reception here, 45 yards as well. So they both had really nice performances in this contest. Moving on then, Shawn, to the final moments of the game. Before I get to ask you about the ref potential call that I was mentioning a moment ago, when you have a situation here where McKinnon does the heads-up play, that's going to help to burn time off the clock. They're at the 1-yard line. Is there any point, or is there any thought there going through your head of, let's not settle for the field goal? Like we've been able to drag their timeouts out of the game. We've been able to waste more time off the clock. Let's punch it in here and get the touchdown and see how they do going in the opposite direction. Or are you 100% on board with, let's run this down and just try and take the field goal and get the win here? What's your thoughts on that?
I think you have to take the field goal and get the victory. It's nerve-wracking, even though, again, apples and oranges, you're close enough that anything other than a total shank or a missed snap, right? A missed snap, a missed hold. And suddenly
it has to be chaos. It has to be, a fumbled snap that then leads to a recovery for a touchdown going in the opposite direction kind of thing. A bit like we actually seen, I was about to say that doesn't happen very often, but we've seen that from the Bengals this year. Not that long.
Yeah, well, anything other than just a straightforward win at that point is a massive blow to the Chiefs, because you have the game won. Among the things that the Chiefs did well in this game was you saw them play extremely hard to the whistle, and then their defensive players, it was almost like the strings were cut. I mean, they instantly pulled off of everybody. So you had no chance for any type of penalty. That was huge for them because you can't afford to give any extra opportunity. You have that play at the end with McKinnon. You got the 2 weeks to prepare. I mean, obviously, it was one where, because he allowed himself to get so close, you're almost thinking, like, is he actually going to go in? But then you see him slide down. I mean, everything about this is just so perfectly prepared from the Chiefs side. I think that fans of the Chiefs, fans of good football, love to see that because, again, they just seemed like they had every scenario covered. At least the ones that came up in this game, they had covered and they executed it perfectly. It's got to be a field goal for the win. There's no way you can let Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown and Devontae Smith have the ball, and they go and score a touchdown in the last minute. They're going to go for 2 and win the game. I mean, you have to have 0 time left on the clock. It has to be the final score wins, and that's one of the reasons why I almost felt like the Eagles making the 2-point conversion was a key play for Kansas City. Because once you have the game tied again, you have to affirmatively go make a play to win. And you're thinking, we're going to run the clock out and we're going to score. Yeah. Whereas if you're up by 2, then you get into this situation where we're trying to run the clock, but maybe we have to punt immediately. And if they score, we come back and score at the end. Obviously, the Eagles saw how that doesn't necessarily work. Anybody knows it doesn't necessarily work. But there are a lot of ways that you can think, well, we could still win if we get stopped if you're up by 2. And that is sort of the death trap to fall into. if you get the stop, you're up 2, and you don't score yourself, the Eagles are going to score either with a field goal or touch, some other way to win that game. And so for the Chiefs to be forced to score, I really liked that. They obviously do go down and do it, and it's just unfortunate that it is marred by a penalty. Again, just a very clear penalty, but that's the reason it's controversial and the reason it's sad is not because it's not the right call, but because that's not the way that you want it to end. I mean, you want it to end with a player making a beautiful play to be part of the story. And it's a terrible, from a story perspective and from a memory perspective, it's a terrible way for the game to end. And I think that's what everybody is disappointed about. You just want to see this end on a touchdown or a stop, and the Eagles going the other way, one way or the other. You don't want it to end on what did happen. I mean, we say the Chiefs had to just run the clock out and kick the field goal. That's what had to happen. But it's also not what you wanted to have happen from a story perspective. And there's a sigh of relief from a Chiefs fan when it does happen. But I mean, basically, even for Chiefs fans, that you would have preferred just for that pass to be complete. And that's the thing about it too, is that Juju beats the defender. Bradbury, very honestly said, I interfered with him and just hoped it wouldn't get called. The reason that these penalties are in the game is that if you don't have them, then you have the New England Patriots in the first decade of this century where they just hold in every play. That's not good football. That's not what we want to see. It's very sad that it had to end that way, because from a narrative perspective and from a beauty of the game perspective, from a perfect battle between two of the all-time greats, everything had more or less been perfect until that point. And it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and I do think that was the final thing I was going to get to, is the penalty. There's obviously a lot of discussion about it online and, and the coverage of the game since it obviously occurred. I do think it's a penalty. It's a soft penalty, but I think it is a penalty. I think it also stands out in this game because it was such a clean game overall. You mentioned how the Chiefs defenders were kind of, once the whistle was blown, they were getting out of there. It was very well done from both sides. Also, for the a player to come out after the game and say, look, I was hoping I was going to get away with it. And a lot of the time that is the part, I think, where people think it's controversial, is a lot of the time you will get away with that. But it is something that is quite subjective, and depending on which way the officials are looking at it, it could be given. You may get away with it, but I think it's one that you may get away with that is a penalty rather than it isn't a penalty. But you even mentioned there, Shawn, another note is that was the 3rd and 8, Philadelphia 15-yard line, 1:54 left in the 4th quarter. So if that was complete, which I don't think it had really a chance to get completed, I think that's another reason people are saying, well, maybe it could have been let go. But I also think that it wasn't called pass interference. I think that's why it's not pass interference. It's defensive holding rather than that, because of the way the play actually also plays out. But that leads to having the ball 1:54 left at the Eagles 11 with 1st down, obviously. So if he did catch that, we're into a situation where it's 1:54, maybe 1:48 after the kickoff and everything, that the Eagles have to try and tie this up again. So we would have been into another exceptional finish to the game. But there's really, when it's a game like soccer, for example, as well, people always say it's really tough to lose on penalty shootouts. If this had went to overtime, which I was hoping for at a point in the game, again, tough for somebody to lose however it happens. There's really no way for a game like this to end that everyone's going to be satisfied with the conclusion. That's part of sports. But when we get that exceptional play that I've mentioned a few times, the McKinnon play, they get the field goal, they get the win, 38-35, just a truly exceptional game, 2 exceptional teams, and the Chiefs continue to add to the legacy for the players that we've mentioned a number of times. Shawn, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to add in? The one thing I was going to say to you is, after the game, Travis Kelce, who cuts these, like, I'm a wrestling fan, he basically cuts these extraordinary promos after games where he goes after somebody. After this one, Shawn, he goes after everybody basically and says nobody believed in him. Then after the Tyreek Hill trade, basically everyone thought that this team was a rebuilding team. They're really going nowhere. Shawn, I remember the immediate reaction podcast that you did with Ben Gretsch for Stealing Bananas, maybe like 40 minutes after the trade happened, where you thought that it would make this team better and give them more ways to win. He obviously didn't listen to that episode of Stealing Bananas, Shawn. He hasn't filed that one away. when nobody was thinking they could win this. What do you think?
So you're saying that the one thing Travis Kelce could have done better this season was to win the Super Bowl and then say stealing bananas was right.
Yeah, oh, that would have been really good. That would have been great for the brand. But yeah, awesome. I enjoy the way that he actually also has a fantastic podcast with his brother, who was also in the Super Bowl here. So yeah, I'm sure they'll have some stories to tell after coming out of this one. But any final thoughts, Shawn, on the Super Bowl as we look into the offseason now with lots to think about and discuss?
Yeah, I can't wait for the dynasty drafts and trades that you and I are going to do. Can't wait for the FFPC and Underdog drafts. We're heading towards prospect season, and the RotoViz rookie guide will be out. I wrote a little piece last week talking about some of my favorite, slightly more below the radar players, and they're still extremely important guys who are going to make an impact in 2023. That's one of the reasons you write about them. But talking a little bit about some of the things we've done in the guide recently that has been such a big deal. Colm, the other thing that's kind of come out in the last week and gotten a little more notice is it does look like Sam Howell is going to be the guy in Washington. He was really one of the main focal points of last year's guide. Most of our listeners and readers are massively overweight on Howell, and because of the importance of quarterbacks in Superflex, I mean, that could be a big deal for a long time. So I'm not saying that we're going to be perfect in the guide. Obviously, we've had projections and picks there that weren't perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. It's impossible to get the draft perfect, but I'm just so excited about the hits that we have had and the way that that's allowed readers of the guide to benefit in terms of their specific dynasty teams. That's what we're looking to do. Obviously, if you're looking at it from a redraft perspective, lots of great nuggets in there as well. So I'm excited for that. But Colm, Super Bowl 57, the perfect way to end a season that had some faults at different points. I think that the dynamism of these two teams, very different templates, but in many ways, the same template. In that you're going to be good on offense, you're going to be good on defense, you're going to build a power team. You're not going to go out there and say we're going to be good at this little niche thing and somehow we're hoping to win the Super Bowl by a miracle. These teams that are building their brand and their philosophy on getting lucky, I think that's going to be unsustainable. You love the fact that two teams like this played in the Super Bowl. You love the fact that the Super Bowl was awesome. I think that this can't help but create better football in the future. I think that we're in the golden age of young QBs with Mahomes and Hurts and Burrow and Josh Allen. The future is so bright. Fantasy football is going to be so much fun going forward. I can't wait for another fantastic season.
Yeah, and to finish it off with these couple of like really awesome playoff games, and as the season went along, the scoring kind of improved. The games got a little bit more exciting, and I do think that finishing it off on such a high note with a really high scoring Super Bowl kind of has me feeling really revigorated, getting ready to head into the season. So going to be exciting. You mentioned the guide as well. The link to that will be in today's show notes. You can check that out if you are interested. I've mentioned this on a couple of shows, Shawn. I've been blown away by the amount of people who have reached out to say that they have, purchased teams over at the FFPC since we started the Dynasty series. Check that out if you haven't checked it out already. Extra Dynasty podcast coming once a week, the Dynasty Reanimator series. But yeah, fantastic. We're going to be talking about some of those teams over the course of the next couple of weeks, and different questions coming in for the new best ball contest that Shawn hinted at there, and also for some of those dynasty teams. So if you have any questions, you want to hear some off-season thoughts on, send them my way on Twitter at Overtime Ireland, or you can email them at overtimeireland@gmail.com. I'll try and get as many of them squeezed into the show over the next couple of months. But really fun to recap the Super Bowl, Shawn. Awesome game, and congratulations again to you. Another Super Bowl for Patrick Mahomes. I feel like, Shawn, there's a chance that over the next couple of years we may be seeing that the Kansas City Chiefs have continued to grow the legacy, I guess, of the star names around that building. But until we are back later in the week, my name is Colm Kelly. You can follow me on Twitter at Overtime Ireland. My co-host is Shawn Siegele. Check out Shawn's work up on rotoviz.com. And until we are back with the next one, have a good one.